Hey everyone! For those of you that I have not met yet, my name is Liz Wright, and I am a professor of psychology at Northwest Vista College in San Antonio, Texas. Right now, I am teaching a fully online child psychology class, and this video goes along with Unit 9 of our class, which looks at social, emotional, and personality development in our 0 to 2s or to 24 months. And sometimes people ask me, why do we talk about children in terms of like their number of months? One of the reasons is that there's so much change and development and growth going on during this time period, and that for some of those things we have really figured out a kind of a 2-month range of where these things should be occurring. And so it helps us to be able to say, that this child is 6 months old, so they, should be able to do this, or they should be able to do that, or, this is coming up next type deal. And then once we get out of the 0 to 2s, then we start focusing on the annual things that the children are capable of doing, as opposed to really focusing more on month to month changes, quantitative and qualitative changes. So, as I said, this unit is about social and emotional and personality development. It starts off with talking about attachment theory. So this is basically how are we how are we focused on our major individual. What I mean by that is almost all of us have a person, whether it's mom, whether it's dad, whether it's grandma, and we are attached to that person. That is the person we look to for comfort. That is the person that we ask for help the most, things like that. And most children in the world are what we call securely attached. What that means is that the child knows that that they will be provided with comfort from this person because they know what to expect. The person has been consistent with them. The person has helped them to navigate their emotional experiences, and they have been consistently helpful or positive in terms of the child's development. We can also talk about insecure attachment and insecure attachment types, and which is interesting because historically and recently now there's been like a huge amount of discussion about insecure attachment, especially insecure avoidant or insecure anxious attachment on social media, on TikTok, things like that. And I always find it interesting because I'm like, most of the world is securely attached, but we, for some reason, end up being fixated, super interested in looking at the non-normal or the non-expected stuff. So just know that most of the kids that you run into as an individual are going to be securely attached. You may find that there's some insecurely attached kiddos. Maybe they have learned that their primary caretaker is not available to them, does not provide them what we call contact comfort, which is this idea of like if the child gets scared, one of the things that they do is they go to find their person to help them feel better. And if you look at the research in the book, Harry Harlow did a lot of research on using baby monkeys relating to contact comfort. And what he found was that monkeys would prefer the um, the fake mama monkey that was soft, as opposed to the mama monkey that provided food but was not soft. So what they ended up doing is they would go to the mama monkey who was not soft and provided food, they would eat, and then they would go to the soft mama monkey who provided nothing else except for the basically comfort, right? In order to, get the comfort from the mama monkey. So we can talk about, avoidant attachment. So these folks tend to avoid creating attachments with other people. And we can even bring attachment into adult literature as well. And we do see that, attachment is pretty consistent across the lifespan unless there's intervention, unless there's trauma, unless there's change. So yes, most adults are securely attached, again, unless there was trauma. And then, people who started off as insecurely attached can experience change through change intervention strategies such as counseling, things like that. And then we've got ambivalent or resistant attachment. These kiddos will show that in some situations they will seek out their caregiver, and in other situations they will push their caregiver away. And we also can see sometimes disorganized attachment. And many times this experience or this kind of learned behavior comes from experiencing childhood with a parent who might have been disorganized themselves, not disorganized in like, where's my stuff, but disorganized in thinking. So mental disorganization. So maybe we're talking about a parent who has schizophrenia. And I remember I talked to a client that his mom had schizophrenia, and she had told him that there were lots of things outside of their house that were scary, that were trying to get him. And she said something about, there's men outside of our house that are watching us, that are just waiting for you to come outside to steal you. And so he, of course, went to the window and was like, where are these men? I want to see them. And he couldn't see anything. And so it kind of made him question his own sensory abilities. Like, rather than say, something's wrong with mom, like she sees stuff that's not there. This child inherently trusted his mother so much that he questioned himself rather than questioning her. And so when we interact with, for a long period of time, adults that have this sort of disorganized behavior themselves, it becomes challenging for the child to figure out who they can trust and who they can't trust, and what senses of their own they can trust, and things like that. So we are going to be talking about attachment for this unit. And Bowlby's initial research did look at different stages of attachment. So how do we become attached to our primary attachment figure? And this information might be useful if we are, working in a pediatrician's office to help parents become more attached with their children, things like that. Also, if you're working with children who experience disordered attachment, then it might be useful to go back through the stages and start over with developing that initial pre-attachment, and then kind of going through the process again to develop a secure attachment. What else does this chapter talk about? It talks about separation anxiety, so anxiety that children have surrounding being without their primary attachment figure. And then it also talks about stranger anxiety, which is just this idea that children are worried about people that they don't know. And these come about at different time periods in the child's life. You will see it, pop out more at certain time periods, and you can recognize like, hey, that's totally normal for my kid to be wary of people that they haven't met yet. Another thing that kiddos do, especially when it relates to attachment, is what we call social referencing. So if they're in a social situation and something happens and they've never experienced it before, they don't know what emotion to experience, or they don't know how to respond emotionally to this situation, they will look to their primary caregiver like, what do I do here? What's going on? What's the play, right? And so they will look back to their primary caregiver to see what their primary caregiver's response is. And when I was working as a therapist, I used to talk to parents a lot and say, look, if you particularly have anxiety surrounding specific things, you really want to kind of practice the not responding anxiously, because something's going to happen. Your kid's going to reference you and you're going to be like, right? And so that's how they're going to respond to whatever this is. Um, and so if you do not want to give the gift of anxiety to your children, which most of us don't, right? Then you want to be able to respond to things and talk to your children about, how does that make them feel, as opposed to, well, that kind of creeps me out, right? I'll give you an example. I do not like snakes at all. It's just a thing. I've always been, any creepy crawlies, just, I have autism. It's a sensory thing. Plus also just, I am not 100% on, and probably will never remember 100% which ones are bad, which ones are good. And so snakes creep me out. Okay. And then I had sons, and my stepson, actually, initially, even before I had my own children, came into the house one day, and I was in my room and I heard him come in the house, and I hear, "Hey, Liz, guess what I found outside?" And I'm thinking to myself, I know it's a snake. I know it's a snake. And I was like, "What'd you find, bud?" And he's like, "Look." And he shows me this snake. And, I hadn't practiced yet because it hadn't been part of, me recognizing what I needed to do. And I was just like, "Can you please take that outside?" And he looked at me, and he was old enough to have developed his own emotions surrounding snakes. And he was like, "Are you afraid of it?" I was just like, I just really, I just, I don't do snakes. I don't like them. And he was like, "Oh, okay, I'll take it back outside." And I was like, "Thanks, dude." Um, but that really helped me to recognize, like, if you do eventually have your own children, you're going to have to deal with this, and you're going to have to not teach them to have your anxieties. So I did start practicing, some strategies of, like, kind of making sure my face doesn't go like, "Oh God." And I really hope that YouTube does not pull that up as the picture that's going to go on the cover of this video, because that would not be good, right? Um, but so my children, especially Silas, my older son, got interested in snakes. And so I really, really practiced my, "That's exciting, that's cool." Even though inside I was like, gross, gross. So Silas wanted his own snake. And so he was able to get a snake. I have a colleague who's actually a herpetologist. He studies snakes, and he has a bunch of friends who all own snakes of different ages and snakes of different kinds. And he talked to a bunch of his friends, and they said, we have this Western hognose that used to be a educational snake. So it means it's been handled by lots of kids. It's been shown around. It's probably older. And it hasn't bitten anybody, right? And they want to donate it so that Silas can have a snake. And I was just like, super cool. Thanks. So again, because of social referencing, I really had to practice that, like, not being freaked out stuff. And think about it this way. I mean, your kids are going to experience so many different things. And you may say, "I don't have kids. I'm not going to have kids." Perfectly fine. That's awesome. But if you work with kids, if you're a tia or a tio, they're going to look at you and go like, "Is this okay?" And so you need to recognize that, we're going to be on the playground, and they're going to try to do something that you may be going inside, right? But if they look at you and they see that, then that's going to make them more fearful, which may make them more likely to fall. But so instead, if we think that they're capable of doing it and we think it's safe, then we're like, "Yeah, go ahead, dude. Rock on. Awesome." This also helps with, little boo-boos. A lot of times kids will get a little boo-boo and they look at you like, "Do I cry? Do I?" And you're like, "It's fine." As our ancestors used to say, "Rub some dirt on it. It'll be fine." So we don't want to overreact to small things, because then we'll get a child that will overreact to small things. So really they're referencing you to figure out, like, what's the play here? What do I do? How do I respond to this? And we need to keep that in mind. Um, this unit also talks about emotional development, and how kids, through uh, brain changes, are better able to deal with, recognize, and name how they're feeling, which is going to be important and useful as they get older. And then also, as an adult, I don't know how many adults I've talked to that have a very limited emotion vocabulary. And you ask them, name 15 emotions, and they get kind of stuck. They're like sad, happy, angry, mad. I'm like, well, elated, justified, and they're like, no, this is all I have. So we want our children to be able to recognize the biological stuff that's going along with happiness, that's going along with anxiety, that's going along with fear, that's going along with these things that we can then put a name to, and we can explain to people, I'm feeling XYZ. And it's going to be, as I said, useful, because think about, a 3-year-old, and we're kind of skipping ahead a little bit, who gets frustrated with a peer at daycare, and doesn't have the language to tell them, hey, that was my toy, I was playing with it and I wasn't done, and you took it away from me. And I'm frustrated. So many times, if we don't have the language to say those sorts of things, we behaviorally act out. So the child will go over and retake the toy away from the other one, and kind of give them the look like, this was mine, move back into caveman times, right? Ugh, my toy. Or, pinch, hit, bite, something like that, to demonstrate that I don't like what you just did. So we're talking about the development of emotion, the ability to, later on, as I said, identify emotion and to communicate that emotion, is going to be really important for us to do. The children can start to recognize emotional facial features, so smiles, sadness, things like that. And we want to help them to recognize those facial features. Um, the chapter also talks about temperament. And I think of temperament as kind of baby personality. So most personality researchers, my focus is actually in social and personality. So I can tell you this. Most personality researchers don't talk about an individual having a personality, because personality is consistent until adulthood or early adulthood. 18, 25, somewhere around there is really where we think to ourselves, like, okay, this is you, this is your personality. Up until then, we are so influenced by outside social things, such as our peers, such as things that are going on, that what we see as behavior may not be considered personality. So, but temperament is kind of the emotional ability, or the emotional reactions that children have to things. And we can even see temperament in utero. So we have some babies that are pretty laxed or pretty chill. And then we have some babies that are moving a lot, and we may, as the person carrying baby, feel like this baby is very, like, aggressive, and, like, I mean, obviously they're not be thinking like, I'm gonna, elbow this chick. No, that's not how this works. I can't think that yet. But they do have more forceful movement, they do have more sporadic movement, things like that. So we can talk about 3 types of temperament: easy, difficult, slow to warm. And they're really kind of easy to pick out. So easy babies are just that. They don't cry a lot. When they do cry, it's for a particular reason. And they are attempting to communicate something to us, whether it's, uncomfortableness, pain, dirty diaper, tired, food, things like that. Whereas children who are difficult temperament, may cry all the time. And so it can be really hard as an adult, as a parent, as a caregiver, to figure out, like, what is this cry for? Or is this just crying because it's Tuesday? You know, um, it's a day that ends in Y. So easy babies are more adaptable. So changing their routine, changing their situation is easier for them to adapt to. Whereas difficult babies, you change where you sit when you feed them, and it becomes a difficulty for them. Um, and then slow to warm start off as slightly difficult and move into a little bit easier, if that makes sense. So initially, when you interact with the child, they're kind of um, off put from you, and then after a while, they will warm up a little bit. Kind of makes sense in the name, right? You can also kind of tell, and I joke about this, but it's also true, what type of temperament your child has if you haven't recognized it yet, by how often people who interact with your child offer to hang out with them. Um, so if someone's hung out with your child before and they say, like, oh, anytime you want to, like, take a shower or go run an errand or something and you need someone to hang out, like, just call me, then probably you have an easy child. Whereas if you ask people to watch your child to hang out for a little bit and they're like, oh, I'm not sure that I'm the best person for that, or I can't, I'm washing my cat that day, then it's possible that you might have a difficult child. Um, we can also talk about the idea of goodness of fit. So adults have temperament as well. Um, some adults are easygoing. Some adults, as you probably know, are not, and they are difficult adults. Um, and if an adult who has a easy temperament starts interacting with, is a foster parent for or is a caregiver for a difficult baby, it can be really challenging for the two of them to get in sync and to find a rhythm that works for them. Um, and so if the fit between temperaments isn't good, then this is what we talk about in terms of goodness of fit, in terms of parenting. Goodness of fit can influence attachment, can attachment bonding, can influence bonding behavior. I've talked to a lot of adults that have, older children, and they say, I'm not supposed to have a favorite, but I really felt like I had a better bond with this child over that child. And a lot of times that relates to their ability to bond with the child because the child has the same temperament or a similar temperament that they do. Um, and I experience similar things. I have my older son is definitely has an easier temperament than my younger son does, and it is challenging not just for me, but for my husband, for my parents, their grandparents, to develop a positive relationship or a positive bond with my younger son. Um, and so it takes a lot more patience from even a securely attached person or a easy temperament person to consistently interact with an 11-year-old who still has a difficult temperament. um, so and I talk to a lot of people that say, like, I feel bad that, like, I don't feel the same about this kid. And I'm like, you have to understand that, you know, yes, they're your child. They came from you, or you adopted them, or however they became your child. But that doesn't, and you love them. That there's no question about that. But you may not always like their behaviors or how they're behaving right now. I mean, that's human nature, right? Even your significant other, if you have one, you probably always have, this loving feelings for them, but every once in a while, you're like, you're kind of being a jerk. Just saying, right? So we can talk about how, we can work on creating a better bond between parent and caregiver and child. based upon recognizing temperaments and figuring out, I have an easy temperament, so-and-so has a slow to warm temperament. How do we navigate this to create a better bond between our kids and between kids and some sort of adult? And then finally, this chapter talks about autism spectrum disorder, which I can and will do a separate video about, because this would end up being like a 4-hour TED Talk. I have been diagnosed with autism. Both my sons have been diagnosed with autism and ADHD, so they actually experience AU ADHD. And so I have a lot of experience with this topic. I've gone through, well, when I worked as a therapist, I worked mostly with children with autism and with ADHD, also with traumatic experiences, PTSD. I've done, excuse me, a lot of trainings working specifically with children with autism, children, adults, college students with autism. So I have a lot to say on this topic. And it's also a research interest of mine because, it's me and my kids. So I would like to learn more about it. So yeah, I can talk about this stuff for a while. I find it interesting that the author of our textbook put autism in the 0 to 2 social emotional chapter. Typically, the average age for diagnosis is actually 5. But we do start to see behaviors that are related to the diagnosis of autism in the 0 to 2s. And so I guess that's why they put it in this chapter. So the diagnostic criteria in terms of diagnosing autism include some sort of communication challenges. So some children on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, are going to be verbal, but maybe they're going to have trouble understanding other people's communication. We may, as a person with autism, be nonverbal. We may be somewhat verbal. So you may see that there are some children who utilize some sort of communication device. And this is one of the things that's really important for us to recognize as we're talking about autism, is that it is a spectrum, all the way from a person is functioning in society and nobody has any clue that this person might be diagnosed with autism, all the way down to this child is in need of 24-hour care and observation so that they can get things done that they need to get done and that they're safe. So there's this huge wide range of behaviors, abilities, cognitive abilities within this spectrum. But I think a lot of times, because of media, people assume that the idea of an autism savant, so a person with autism has some sort of like bonus skill, like I'm really good with numbers or something like that. That's the norm, and it is not. So we do find that, as I said, so there are typically communication challenges. Many children who have autism do have at least a delay in language development, if not that they're developing language much later than their peers. We do see that there's gender differences, that more boys than girls are, actually I should say sex differences. There's more boys than girls who are diagnosed with autism. And that may be because the behaviors that are expected of girls are to be quiet, to not be rambunctious. And many children who have autism are able to find their niche, their area of interest, and hyper focus on it. And so, but if the child is a boy with a hyperfocus, their hyperfocus might include some sensory stuff where they feel the need to run around and touch things, things like that. And so we're more likely to observe or to see observable behaviors that make us go, you on the spectrum, in boys than we are in girls. And this lack of diagnosis is also something that we see for autism. I mean, for ADHD as well. And we do see that a lot of girls and women are diagnosed later in life, whereas boys with autism and or ADHD are diagnosed a lot earlier in life. Um, so there's going to be some sort of communication challenges. There's typically going to be hyper focus of some sort. There may be some social challenges, misunderstanding social cues, not understanding others' social intentions, not understanding the social norms of a social situation, even though we've been taught them, showed them numerous times. Not recognizing the utility, importance, the why of certain rules, things like that. I don't know how many times my 13-year-old will say, but why? Why do I have to do that? I'm like, because that's just how it's done. And for me, as a 40-something-year-old woman with autism, I wasn't diagnosed until after my youngest son was diagnosed. I just, grew up thinking that I was just a strange kid. Cool. All right. Whatevs. I thought that I, had trouble making friends. I didn't really understand people. Maybe one of the reasons I went into studying psychology. And then when I met with the developmental behavioral specialist who assessed Sage, he asked me, he said, well, when did you get diagnosed? And I was like, not, I'm not. And he was like, well, you can now say that you've been officially diagnosed. He's like, I've watched you this entire time. And yeah, I mean, if we were here talking about you, then I would diagnose you. And I was just like, really? Why? And he gave me off a list of reasons. And I was like, huh, I never noticed those things. But as a kid, I, was not good at understanding people's intentions in their language. And I had a lot of sensory stuff, food sensory stuff. And I watched people to try to figure out how do you look normal and then tried to do those things. I observed people to try to figure out, what do people do, normal people do, and then, kind of figure out how can I act that way so that I can look normal. So doing this process is what most people with autism call masking. It's figuring out what's expected of me in this social situation and then practicing it until I can appear to look natural at doing it. And we will interact with a lot of kids who, after learning how to mask, how to not, blurt out about their special interests during a conversation with other people and things like that, they learn to, how to start a conversation. And, when people say to them like, hey, how are you? A lot of times people with autism will take that as like the opportunity to kind of, I don't want to say trauma dump, but like be like, well, actually, I've been having a horrible morning and I dumped coffee on myself. And we have to remind ourselves like, no, they don't care. This is a social contract. This is a social interaction. All we're supposed to do is say, good, thanks, how are you? And that's it. It's practice. You just practice it. You just do it. And so, yeah, a lot of times my son will say to me, "But why? Why do we have to do that?" I'm like, you know what? I totally get it. I totally agree with you. I'm that person that will send a text message that won't say like, "Hey, good morning. I hope you're having a great morning. What's going on with this thing?" A lot of times I forget about the niceties part and I just like shoot off the text message to people, and people that may not know me well kind of like read it and go like, "Good morning, Liz. Um, here's the information that you asked me for." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, that part. Sorry. I just woke up. I didn't put my mask on yet." Right. Um, but so yeah, we are going to delve into some stuff relating to autism in this chapter. And I will have some videos available as soon as I finish making them, about our experiences with autism, so that you can see some firsthand stuff. And I also will continue to, I'll bring this up in a later social emotional chapter as well, so that we can see what are going on with some of our kids with, some of our kids who are neurotypical, but also some of our kids who are neuroatypical. So their brains work differently, but that doesn't mean that they're any less useful, interesting, important, things like that. And we will continue to talk about, what is a neurotypical brain, so an average brain, but then also how are the neuroatypical brains working in this situation, and what can we do to assist children and adults who have neuroatypical brains to do the things that they're expected to do, that we want them to do, things like that. Because having neurodivergent folks in our classroom, um, in our workplace, is beneficial. And folks who think differently, who think outside of the box, who recognize that there are social norms, but go, well, but why? Why can't we do it this way? Can be really helpful in terms of thinking about maybe a culture of a school or a culture of a company, and going, yeah, why do we do that? Why can't we do it differently? And so getting the input from folks who think differently is highly beneficial to um, almost anything that you're doing. All right. So again, we will talk more about this at a different point, but I just kind of wanted to overview this unit with y'all so that you had some idea of where we were going for Unit 9. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the comments and I will respond back to them. If not, then keep going through this unit and you will learn lots and lots more. Thanks.